One last thing I'm going to mention, and it is the last thing, and it is a segue into Jennifer's presentation this evening, and that has to do with William Geil and what's going on there. When the Gustafsons gave us, I guess, this collection in 2008 timeframe, my predecessor, Judge Ed Ludwig, put the word out to academia, to China, where Geil spent a lot of time, telling people that we had this marvelous collection to see if there'd be any interest. There was interest, but at that time we established a goal that said that we would like to elevate or resurrect the reputation, if you will, of William Edgar Geil to the level that is with Henry Mercer, James Michener, Margaret Mead, Pearl Buck, a couple towns over, because we think he belongs in that category. And we have made, I'm going to say, significant progress in the last 2 or 3 years along those lines. One of the things we did is we commissioned a DVD to be made of Geil's life, and we did that, and it was a 40-minute video. Jennifer Lin, who I will introduce more formally in just a couple of minutes, was the producer of that video. The video wound up winning the New Hope Film Festival Award a couple of years ago for Best Biography, and it did get out to the world. That plus our online collection of some 4,000 Geil records went out on the internet, available to the world, and was seen in China. Bringing you up to date, from that, we have had this year visits from 4 different Chinese groups wanting to see more about China, or our collection on China. And it didn't dawn on me until the last visit that we had, is that these photographs, we have, I don't know, 1,000 photographs. Jim Myers is in the audience. He may be upstairs. He probably knows better than I the exact number. But it became apparent to me the reason why, and that is because the Chinese people, and we think of China as ancient history, thousands and thousands of years old compared to our 250 years or whatever it is. But even though the Chinese people have that kind of history, they don't have access to it. When Mao Zedong and the communists came in there, one of the things they did is to burn and destroy a lot of their history. Photographs, artifacts, buildings went up. So now that China is emerging into the 21st century and they're realizing that they are interested in their own history, they find that they don't have it. And they look at people like us who have a lot of the Chinese history right here in little old Doylestown. So also skipping to the future, we found ourselves with a crew from CCTV, Chinese Central Television, visiting us this past summer. They sent 4 people from Beijing here, plus they picked up a film crew in New York, and they were here videoing things that we had here. Steve Osborne opened up his house so they can video the Barons, video William Edgar Geil's boyhood home, which belongs to this gentleman right here, on Court Street, and the graveyard, as a matter of fact, where Geil's entire family is buried. This will be shown on a documentary series in China starting, I think, next month and extending to probably June of next year as well. It will be in 6 different episodes. It will be on the Great Wall of China. The last episode will feature William Edgar Geil and Doylestown. It will be seen by some 300 million Chinese people. So get ready for a horde of Chinese. Did you hear that, Mr. Mayor? You better start planning now. If I failed to introduce him, Ron Strauss, Mayor of Doylestown, is standing right over there. Thank you very much for coming, Ron. So we are doing a number of things in connection with what we think is going to be increased interest, not only from China, but the rest of this country here. We're starting to decorate our meeting room. So you see on the wall here some placards of William Edgar Geil, some artifacts that we have in the cabinets there, and we will continue to us up as part of the Geilization, if you will, of the society. Okay, Jennifer Lin. Jennifer Lin is a lifelong Doylestown resident. She was a reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer for about a 30-year period. In that capacity, she wrote a major article on William Edgar Geil about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, which piqued some interest in Doylestown. She has roots in China, which she will talk about, and she is, as I mentioned, the producer of the Geil documentary. And she is here tonight. But let me ask this. How many of you have seen this documentary, this 40-minute doc? Good, good, good. So at least half of you. Jennifer was the producer of this great video. And so she is here to give you the rest of the story. Yes, so the half of you who have not seen this video, by the end of this presentation, my prediction is that you will want to see this video. And fortunately for you, we can accommodate you. We actually sell these videos. And the timing is perfect. Actually, we sell them for $20 a piece. If you are a member, it's only $15. And if you're not a member, well, we can accommodate you there as well. We have our registration sheets in the back for you as well. If you would like to purchase the video, you can see the man who looks a whole lot like a cross between Santa Claus and Ernest Hemingway. There, you will recognize him just by that description. He has a cache of these videos, and they are for sale. So without further ado, Jennifer Lin. Yeah.
Forgot. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me to talk to the group. By now you all really know the Geil story, so what I thought I would do tonight is just to explain to you how we made this movie, what the process was. And I was the producer, which is a very fancy title, and I learned that really it was my first producing job, and I was really well equipped for it because it occurred to me that what a producer does is really be a mom. So if there are any mothers out there, you could be a Hollywood producer too, because what the job entails is nagging, keeping people on schedule, coming up with the money, coming up with the transportation, keeping everyone on budget. So I was actually pretty well equipped. So to talk about the movie, I first would like to tell you a little bit about myself, because that's how I got involved in this project, really. And Stu, if you could do the first slide. So Stu said I'm a lifelong resident of Doylestown, but that's not really correct. I grew up in the city, and my father immigrated from Shanghai to Philadelphia in 1949. He was a doctor at Temple University Hospital. We lived in the city. 15 years after arriving from China, he bought the old Shutt Farm on Bristol Road. So does anyone know? I know Fletcher knows where it is, but 202 and Bristol Road, the old Shutt Farm. So it's kind of a Chinese thing, you know, land is very important. So he bought the farm, and we used to come up here on weekends. So this was 1964, I've been coming up to Doylestown, and I remember when Doylestown had a Woolworths and a lot of boarded up storefronts, and we could literally walk down Bristol Road in the middle of the street and never see a car. We used to ride horses up and down Bristol Road. So I'm the little one in the pink. But this is our house in Doylestown, where I live now with my husband, and we have 2 children who grew up here and now are adults and on their own. So I do have like a lot of roots and sentimental roots to Doylestown. My husband and I moved into the farmhouse then as our residents in 1990. Next slide, Stu. As Stu mentioned to you, I'm a former reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and you know, given my Chinese roots, the idea of working in China was something I dreamed of doing. So 1996, the newspaper sent me to China with my husband and 2 kids, and I was the Asia correspondent for the Philadelphia Inquirer, based in Beijing, but my beat was covering all of Asia. So we lived in downtown Beijing, not far from the Forbidden City, And I put this up here because the Great Wall was our playground. Our kids went to the international school. They used to take field trips there. We went there with the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts. I went to a 40th birthday party on top of the Great Wall for a friend of mine. Whenever relatives would come visit, we'd go up to the Great Wall, and we had this back way that we would approach it, you know, away from all the tourists. It's like if you're from Philadelphia and you take visitors down to see the Liberty Bell. So I can't tell you how many times I went to the Great Wall, but it was just, you know, it had special meaning for my family. Next slide. So imagine my surprise, I think in 2009, when I picked up the Bucks County Herald and read a story about this Geil exhibit at the Doylestown Historical Society. And I'm like, Geil, who? How do I not know about William Edgar Geil? I'm from, you know, I live in Doylestown. I lived in China. I know the Great Wall. I did many stories about the Great Wall. How do I not know who William Edgar Geil is? Well, thanks to the heirs of Walter Gustafson, Marilyn, Carol, and Eugene, you know, we all now know who William Edgar Geil is. So I was working for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I wrote a story for the newspaper. They put it on the front page to my delight. Interviewed Judge Ludwig and many others about the Geil story, and just became intrigued by it. Judge Ludwig deserves an enormous amount of credit for really telling the world about the Geil legacy. And one of the great things he did after the exhibit was he had a little get-together of people, you know, who were interested in Geil to discuss, what do we do next? I mean, we've had this great, well-received exhibit, what next? And he invited me to the table, which was very generous of him, and there were about 12 of us there. Marilyn, you were there. Joan, you were there, I know. And to talk about like things we needed to do. And top of the list was digitizing the collection. Check that one. Commissioning a book, and that's in the works. And then there was a lot of discussion about a documentary. And really we wanted to, it was kind of the consensus of the group that we need to bring this story into the classroom. You know, kids need to grow up kind of learning about Geil when they learn about China. So this was 2009, I think, that these ideas were percolating. You know, flash forward to like 2012, I think it was January, and the judge and I were just exchanging emails one day, and I asked him, I said, Judge, whatever happened to the documentary? And he said, oh, you know, it's stalled, it hasn't happened. And being the mom that I am, I said, Judge, I know a very young filmmaker who could do a really good job if you would be interested. And so he said, well, you know, on one condition, he goes, I want you to produce it because I want you to be someone to be accountable. So 2012, myself and the very young producer, who's also my son, Carl Stieg, who just happened to be graduating from the University of Southern California's film program. Carl, by the way, cut his teeth at the Bucks Film Fest. You know, I think his first film that was aired there was when he was in 7th grade. Anyway, so the judge agreed, and Carl and Carl's friend from USC, who was the cinematographer, Andrew Stowe, and myself, we set out to do a documentary about Geil. So the question, it really was a kind of a family affair because in addition to Carl, my son, my husband is also a journalist. He's an editor at Men's Health magazine. So we all kind of, we made this a family project. So the first question is, what story to tell? I mean, we all know the Geil story, but in terms of a movie, we needed to focus on, you know, aspects of Geil. Geil, the world traveler, was one story, but there was also kind of the more recent story about the papers and, you know, the Gustafson family, you know, donating this collection, and kind of, so there were almost like two stories to tell. So next slide, please. We decided, though, in terms of the world travels, I mean, as you know, Geil went to the South Pacific, he went to Asia, he walked across Africa, he went to Patmos in Greece, he went to the Holy Land. I mean, you could literally do a documentary about all of his world travels, but we decided to focus on China, partly because my own bias, but also because we thought that we could really spark the imagination of school kids if we focused on China, because they all learn about China, I think, in 6th grade in the Central Bucks School District. So we opted to hone in more on China, which really was a country that, you know, once Geil went there, he really focused himself on China. So what that entailed as a first step, Marilyn did a fabulous job of going through the collection and really distilling it for the exhibit. But in terms of the filmmaking, what we needed to do is distill it even further. So if there are any cooks out there, it's like making a reduction sauce. Like Marilyn took it to here, and we really needed to distill it even further. So my husband and I, over the course of many, many weekends, I'm sure much to the consternation of Marilyn, because I don't know if everyone remembers, but the collection used to be that room, you know, on the 2nd floor of the society, and it was about this big, and there were boxes everywhere and pictures, and so my husband and I spent many Saturdays looking at every single photograph and reading every single article, or as many as we could, because there are 4,000. Next, please. So we were really looking for words and quotes that we could then use for the documentary to bring Geil's voice to the screen. Next one, Stu.
Can I say something?
Yes, go ahead.
Our lovely Sharon here archived every single one of those newspaper clippings.
Joan?
She did it year by year by year by year. She did a fantastic job. Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon.
here.
Okay, Sharon.
Sharon did it.
Thank you, Sharon.
Gotta say that.
You did a great job, and we're the ones who ruined it when we were rifling through it. So, but we were looking for words to bring Geil's voice to the movie, and there was this one quote from, Marilyn, do you know what this is exactly? He wrote it when he was on the road, I think. But what I loved so much was this quote here. I look westward along the Great Wall, and behold a vast empire at the present more ancient than modern. And there was just something about that sentence that really, it was poetic. And so we began, you know, just gathering quotes for the eventual script. Next slide, please. This is the Philadelphia North American. This is a great clip here. Next slide. We also then, to me, the wonder of the collection really are the photographs. I just, you know, as a China hand, to be able to see what China looked like 100 years ago is just thrilling. So we went through the collection to try to find those really iconic images that say China. Next slide. And so these are just some of our favorites. You got to love this one. Yeah. Next slide. This is in Australia, and Geil is right there.
How many people were in there? About 6,000.
6,000 or so, yep. Next slide, please. This is classic. You know, these are images that say China and say Geil. Next, please. So in terms of building the documentary, you need talking heads. These are people who are Geil guides, people who could help frame the story for us on camera. And we really lucked out. We had many excellent, what we call talking heads. Jim Myers, who's upstairs, if you can hear me, thank you. Jim was one of our talking heads. He had a vast collection of the photographs. But on the left is Rob LaFleur. Does everyone know who Rob is? Yeah? And on the right is William Lindsay. Rob LaFleur is a history professor from Beloit College and became a member of the Geil cult because he was very interested in the 5 sacred mountains, and that's how he learned about Geil. To the right is William Lindsay. William Lindsay is a wonderful character. He's a British researcher, explorer, writer. And he's really one of the preeminent Great Wall experts in the world. He lives in Beijing. He has a kind of a bed and breakfast or an inn right at the foot of the Great Wall. So it was Lindsay who in 2009, I forget his name now, but a volunteer at the society was trying, the collection just came into the possession of the society, Tim was trying to find out, who is this person Geil? So he basically kind of sent out an SOS sent out a message to the Great Wall, Friends of the Great Wall Society, which is Lindsay's group in China, and said, we just came into this collection. We don't really know a lot about him. Do you know anything about William Edgar Geil? And Lindsay immediately replied and said, I have been searching for the William Edgar Geil collection for 15, 20 years. So that's the other side of the story. It's not like, not only who was Geil and what did he do, but this collection and how he kind of brought Geil to life and brought him out of obscurity. So we relied on Rob and William Lindsay to speak on camera and to frame the Geil story for us. Next, please. So we made the decision to travel to China and retrace Geil's steps. And luckily for us, William Lindsay, that's a good part of what he does. I mean, in addition to being, a researcher and a writer, he also does operate this little inn, and he takes people to a section of the Great Wall that is not restored. It's very rugged. And he has gone about re-photographing many of the places that Geil photographed in 1908. He's the Geil man. Next slide, please. I just have a couple of slides here to show you kind of what the photo shoot was like in China. Carl, my son, is the one in the red hat, and Andrew, the cinematographer, is the one on the left. Next slide. So this shows you that, to the right, that's basically what the section of the wall was where we were walking. I mean, it was pretty rugged. And there were a lot of steep ascents, which is fine if you're, a 22-year-old, but I had a little bit of trouble, I have to admit to you. Next slide. We were incredibly fortunate in that it was a very clear weekend that we were there. We were walking on the wall for about 3 days, I think it was, staying at Lindsay's Inn, and then we would hike up to the wall. Next slide, please. This is, Tom, you'll appreciate this. This was taken in what they call the golden hour, photographers. Okay, what that means, it's either sunrise or sunset. Now think about that. To get sunrise on the Great Wall means you have to climb to the top of the wall by the time the sun comes up. So it's always pitch dark, at 3 in the morning, and we're hiking up there with tripods, sliding tripods, 2 cameras. And the other story I like to tell is for one of the golden hours at sunset, it means that the sun then goes down and it's dark and you're up at the top there and you have to get down, and we had 1 flashlight and we're like walking along the edge of the Great Wall. And luckily I couldn't really see where I was going, because when we came up the next morning, I realized that we were like walking along an edge here, and it was like a 2-story drop, and I had a horrible fear of heights, so it's like, oh my God. So I think the 3rd ascent of the wall when we were there, I opted out and stayed back at the inn. So next slide. This is Carl and Andrew. Next. We also photographed around the little village. Geil stayed in this village when he came through this part of China. I think Lindsay had mentioned that there's a passage in the book about it. Next. Again, just to give you kind of a sense of the environment. Next. This is Lindsay's, the inn that he runs. So it used to be a schoolhouse, and he bought it and converted it into where he lives and where he has rooms there too. And there's Lindsay, Carl, and Andrew enjoying jiaozi, which are like the dumplings. Next. Piao was a friend of Lindsay, and Piao was able to retrace Lindsay's trip up the Yangtze River, and he re-photographed many of the shots that Geil took when he did his river tour. Next. Forbidden City. A lot of our filmmaking we did it kind of guerrilla style. In China, you don't want to ask for permission because it can get a little complicated, so we just took this camera into the Forbidden City and set up the tripod and then left quickly. So there was a lot of guerrilla shooting. With a low-budget documentary, you have to rely on the kindness of friends to get it made. I wanted to just mention a few of them. The narrator. People who have seen the documentary, do you remember the narrator's voice by any chance? He had a very smooth voice. So my son in Hollywood decided when he was directing this movie, he wanted to get Bradley Cooper to do the narration. And, you know, I was trying to dissuade him, saying, Carl, I'm not sure Bradley's going to do it. But Mom, he's from this area. He grew up in Rydell. He might want to do it. I said, you try. So he approached Bradley Cooper's agent, and Bradley was busy. So then he said, Alexis Denisof. Now, I didn't know who he was, but he was in Buffy the Vampire, Angel. So if you're 23, 24, you might know who he is. He was also in Much Ado About Nothing, the most recent production of that, which was directed by Josh Whedon, what's his name, Tom, do you know? Josh, the big director. Anyway, so Carl reached out to Alexis Denisof, who is, you know, he's an established Hollywood actor, and said, would you do this? And he said, yes. He said, be at my house, you know, on this day, I'll give you 2 hours, come prepared. So, okay, so Carl did that. My husband helped him to write the script. They went over, they did his voice. He then became the voice of the narrator. The voice of Geil, which is a very deep baritone voice in the movie, is Carl's film professor at USC. The female voices, there are a couple of them, is Adrienne Visnick, and she is from this area, went to Germantown Academy, and was one of Carl's classmates at USC. And then the composer was a USC student who Carl knew. So we you know, enlisted all of our friends to get it made. Next, please. So now we've gathered all the information. We've gone to China to film. We've written a script. We've collected the images that we wanted and the words that we wanted. But then you get to a point where you ask yourself, what am I trying to say? What is this movie really about? And Rob LaFleur really helped us to frame it. And Rob was very good at putting Geil in the proper time and place. And he said to us that when Geil was beginning his journeys overseas, he goes, Americans were starting to look outwards for the first time. It was post-Chicago World's Fair. And they were beginning to be curious about the world and what lay beyond Doylestown. So what we wanted to do in the film is we wanted people to really think about, what was it like? I mean, think about it. 1908, you're going to China from Doylestown. I mean, it took you a couple of hours just to get to Philadelphia from Doylestown. You could take the train, but You know, and then from there you would have to take a train across the country and get on a steamship, and that would take you 3 weeks, and then you get to the Great Wall. So it was just, we wanted to convey to people just kind of the Herculean effort it took to get from here to there, and to imagine what your hometown was like. And so Geil was a way of doing that. So we put it all together, Geil of Doylestown, Forgotten Explorer. And despite the fact that to this day the judge doesn't like that name, that title, that's what we went with. And next. And it appeared at the county. So that is the backstory. And what I'd like to do now is just to show you the first minute or so of the movie, so you can see how we try to bring everything together and to really capture the imagination of the viewers, and to tell the Geil story.
Imagine your town before the internet, before television, before radio. Your knowledge of the rest of the country and the rest of the world was constricted. Teachers might try to describe distant lands and foreign cultures, but it was just as likely that your image of the world beyond your hometown was a rough sketch outlined by rumors passed from front porch to front porch. Adventure was something in storybooks. But in the second half of the 19th century, a boy from Doylestown, Pennsylvania would grow up to expand that limited view. He embarked on a career that would fill a dozen books, becoming a speaker of uncommon power, an intrepid explorer, and a photographer who preserved invaluable images of vanishing cultures. William Edgar Geil was nothing less than America's lens on the rest of the world. And then he was forgotten.
Does anyone have any questions? No?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment if I
Yes.
may.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of things really interesting about William Lindsay. Number one, he is the president of the International Friends of the Great Wall of China, and as such is probably the preeminent, proponent of the Great Wall in the Western world. And number two, and we met Lindsay and got to know him pretty well, and he came out to our dad's book barn and interviewed Carol and I upstairs in the barn where our dad had kept the collection. Oh man, I could tell you a lot of stories, but I won't. Where was I going with this?
Tonight, tell the stories, we're all here. I'm right on it.
Well, I'll tell you one thing about my dad's book barn. When Rob LaFleur first heard the story about the collection and where it came from, he said to Carol and I one time, he said, I had this image in my mind that the Geil collection was a bunch of boxes moldering away under a big pile of hay in a barn where there were cows and horses and animals. Everybody kept talking about this barn. and that's what he actually thought, which I thought was hilarious. But our dad's book barn was just a renovated Bucks County barn that he turned into his book barn. William carried Geil's book, the 1908 book, called The Great Wall of China. He carried it with him as his Bible on all of his treks along the Great Wall. William Lindsay, I'm talking about. And he always wondered where the rest of the books were, where the rest of the papers were, where the photographs were. But I always thought it was a really great thing that William carried Geil's book with him on his exploration of the Great Wall. And William photographed many, many of the places along the Great Wall that Geil took photographs of and put in his book, which is on display over there in the cabinet. So he's a real interesting character.
Yes, very. And he has a new book about the Great Wall coming out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's out now in China and Australia, but coming out.
The Great Wall is also in there, William Lindsay's book in the bottom shelf in the middle.
So, well, thank you very much, Jennifer. That was really enjoyable. Really was. And you probably have 1,000 of these things, but nevertheless, we're going to give you one anyway. This is not a gift. You can never have too many Mercer-tiles.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So you get a sense of a trajectory, I guess, if you will, from the time that the Gustafson family donated the collection in 2008 to our documenting the collection, the documentary that we talked about, the documentary that will be on Chinese TV, looked at by so many people. And there is actually another step to this that I'll just mention to you because as far as I'm concerned, it's still a little bit pie in the sky, but the Chinese had so much confidence in this TV documentary that they are going to convert it, the script of the documentary, into an IMAX movie. And here I thought, well, this is, just happy talk, but they actually did contract with a director in Hollywood. His name is Keith Merrill. He is not just your hack director. He's an Academy Award-winning director, won an Academy Award for some movie in the 1970s, and he has since become my pen pal. And the handwritten notes that Jennifer showed you in one of the slides, we have 1,500 pages of handwritten notes there, and the director Keith Merrill is going to look for what he calls the heart and soul of William Edgar Geil in his handwritten journals and diaries and use that for the IMAX movie. So it's kind of fun to think about that. Whether or not it happens or not, I don't know, but they're currently scheduled to finish production by the end of next year. So in addition to Jennifer's documentary, the Chinese TV business, and an IMAX movie, Doylestown and William Edgar Geil has the potential to kind of grow in significance here. And so it has us all pretty well excited about all of that.